that tracks well with what Cardinal Nicholas of Cusa said. He believed that due to God's creativity, there would be species on other planets. He thinks on the sun, he thinks on the moon, right? Yeah, so that's certainly a possibility. This superabundance, right, of God's wisdom and creativity, even as rational creatures, even as created in the image of God,
Right.
we do not exhaust the ways in which God's goodness can be participated. The other creatures, right, the universe itself, we could go on and on and on, all have their own way of participating in God's goodness, right? So, with that in mind, where would we put an end to that?
Hi, welcome to another episode of the Catholic Scientist Podcast. This is brought to you by the Society of Catholic Scientists. So just encourage you, if you like what you're hearing on these podcasts, if you're a regular listener, please subscribe to the podcast and click the like button. Doing that is a great way to support the Society and increase the visibility of the podcast and help us with our outreach. So we really appreciate you if you could do that. So I'm your host, Dr. Dan Kuebler, and today I'm joined by two people, my co-host, Dr. Stephen Barr, and then our guest today is Dr. Chris Baglow, who is a professor of theology at the University of Notre Dame and is appointed to the Science and Religion Initiative within the McGrath Institute of Church Life there. So he does a lot of work through the Institute, helping foster the proper way of thinking about the Catholic faith and science with high school teachers and just giving talks throughout the country to college audiences and so forth. So he does a lot of work in this space. And the reason we have him on today and have Dr. Barr here as well is to talk about extraterrestrial life, and particularly how the church views it. How do we make sense if there is extraterrestrial life? What if there's rational extraterrestrial life? And what does that mean for their salvation? What does it mean for our relationship to them, their relationship to God? All these questions that come up when you think about the existence of extraterrestrial life. And Steve has written an article that's on the Society of Catholic Scientists webpage. If you're interested in this topic, you can find that. And Chris has a lecture that's on the Society of Catholic Scientists website. There's a video of a talk that he gave at our annual conference a few years ago. And so both of them have thought extensively about this. So Chris, thanks for joining us.
Oh, it's a pleasure to be here. Thanks, Dan.
Great. So what I was thinking what we could do to start before we dive into sort of the theological issues that might arise if there's extraterrestrial life is just think about what do we know scientifically about the probabilities of there being extraterrestrial life. And Steve, I know that's something that you talked about in your article. So maybe you could just give us a frame. What's the likelihood that there's just life out there, or what's the likelihood, the probability that we're the only life in the universe?
Well, the short answer is we have no idea.
All right, we can stop the podcast right now. We're done. That's it.
We're all done.
By the way, I should mention, if you hear funny noises, I have a terrestrial life form in my living room here with me right now. It's a pug. Tug. So hopefully he'll remain quiet. Well, the expected number of planets with let's call it highly advanced life forms would be the product of the number of habitable planets times the probability per planet, given a habitable planet, the probability that highly advanced life will evolve on it. And so we know something about the first factor, the number of habitable planets. So the number of planets in our a typical galaxy is probably over 100 billion, let's say of order 100 billion. Mm-hmm. And the number of galaxies in what's called the observable universe, that the part of the universe that's close enough that we can see it, is probably 100 billion. 100 billion galaxies times 100 billion stars per galaxy, you're talking at least 10 to the 22 stars. And based on what people have seen with exoplanets and nearby stars, it seems that the number of habitable planets is probably not much less than that. So they're probably, let's say, roughly of order 10 to the 22, maybe 10 to the 21, 10 to the 20. It doesn't matter much. Uh, um,
It's a big number.
habitable planets. That's just in the part of the universe we can see. And the part we can see is the part of the universe where the light has had time to get from there to here since in the time that's elapsed since the Big Bang. Now, there are very strong reasons to believe that the whole universe is exponentially larger than the observable part. And so there could be many more than 10 to the 22 habitable planets. It could be 10 to the 100, 10 to the 1,000. We don't know, but it's a lot. Now, as to the probability per planet, per habitable planet of highly advanced life emerging, well, that depends on how hard it is. And it could be that there are hard steps of evolution. One hard step could be going from inanimate matter to the first living thing, the origin of life problem. And that could be a very low probability, but nobody knows. Another a hard step could be going from, let's say, animals to animals that have the neural wherewithal to process human-like language, and that could be a very hard step. And there could be others. This is your field, Dan, but this may be wrong, but I heard that it might be a hard step going from prokaryotic cells to eukaryotic cells, but maybe that's
Yeah,
wrong.
yeah. Those are probably the two biggest hard steps that probably exist out there are the origin of life, like getting from inanimate to animate objects. How does that occur? And we have different theories about how that might occur, but all of those are still in their infancy, and there's no way to assign probabilities to that, really, given the little that we know. Another one is going from a prokaryote to a eukaryotic cell, going to that complexity, and because it's going to require sort of the engulfing and symbiosis of two cells that, by their nature, prokaryotes don't have the normal ability to engulf each other. So it has to be some kind of chance, sort of freak accident. At least evolutionarily, it seems that might have only happened once or twice, right? A lot of the other things that we argue are hard steps, like getting to multicellularity, seem maybe not to be as hard because those things have evolved multiple times, right? So Simon Conway Morris, in his famous book, Inevitable Life Solutions, Inevitable Humans in the Lonely Universe, he argues once you get over the origin of life, then it's quite likely that these other hard steps are easy to work out. I would disagree. I think the prokaryote to eukaryotic step is going to be a little bit hard, but again, the end result, we don't really know, where we can actually assign probabilities to these, but certainly we don't really know. It could be almost impossible for life.
It could, and here's the thing: let's suppose there are 5 hard steps,
right?
And let's suppose each hard step, just to make round numbers, had a 1 in 1,000 probability of happening on a habitable planet. So that's 1 in 1,000 to the 5th power, because you have to do all 5 of them, say.
Yeah.
And so that would be already 1 part in 10 to the 15. So you can get exponentially low probabilities very easily. And so what you have is an exponentially large number of habitable planets, that we do know, times what could be an exponentially low probability per planet. So you're multiplying a big number times a small number, a very big number times possibly a very small number, which means you can get anything. It could come out to be that the expected number of planets with highly, let's say, advanced life could be exponentially large, or the expected number could be exponentially small, in which case we are a fluke. We shouldn't, we beat the odds. So we could be the only ones. That's quite plausible. Or there could be vast numbers of them, trillions or even many more than that. That's also plausible. So we have no way. The bottom line is we have no way of saying.
Yeah. So given that we don't have any way of knowing, but there has been, particularly say in the last 100 years, a huge interest in extraterrestrial life and different programs to try to measure signals in space, like the SETI program to see if we can see signals coming from other places in the galaxy that are indicative of extraterrestrial life. Is the I just a lot of times people say, well, the science, is pointing towards there's extraterrestrial life and the church has to catch up with it. But in this case, the reality is the church has been speculating, people have been speculating about extraterrestrial life well before. This is something, Chris, maybe you can speak to this,
Sure.
the antiquity of speculation about life outside, physical life outside of the earth.
Yeah. So there have been numerous theologians throughout history. You can find kind of the broad spectrum in Andrew Davison's book on this. In the Catholic tradition, Paul Thigpen's book, Michael Crow's book, that talk about various thinkers who have speculated regarding this, right? Whether it was theologically probable, even if it wouldn't be scientifically probable, right? And some have said, well, sure, due to God's creativity, such as Cardinal Nicholas of Cusa, due to God's creativity, we should expect that there's life on other planets. He even goes so far as to say that some theorize that on our own planet, the species are each kind of the come from the emphasis of specific stellar bodies, right? And if so, why wouldn't that be the case outside of our planet, right?
Yeah.
Why wouldn't that also be the case elsewhere?
Yeah.
So
for
there's
context,
an example.
when did he live? Like he's back in the 1400s. Is that right?
1400s. That's right.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
But before we get into the theology, maybe we could get into whether they visited Earth.
Yeah.
Because that's before we get into theology, more into the theology, get the science, that boring science stuff out of the way.
Yeah.
There's also been a lot of buzz about UFOs lately, or now they've been renamed UAPs, unexplained aerial phenomena, or something like that,
Yeah.
or UFOs. And I know a lot of people who are very worried about this, and the government's keeping it secret and all this kind of stuff. I think if you talk to most astrophysicists, most physicists, my belief, my suspicion is you'll find that they would be very skeptical of the idea that aliens have visited Earth,
Right.
or are likely to. And the reason for that is, first of all, for them to visit Earth, they have to be very close by in cosmic terms, because our own galaxy is 100,000 light years across. So even if you had living things or intelligent life on the other side of the galaxy, it would take them 100,000 years to get here and 100,000 years to return home.
Mm-hmm.
And it's important to understand that faster than light travel, which is a staple of science fiction, is almost certainly impossible. It's not rigorously been proven to be impossible, but there's enormously powerful arguments against it being possible, which means any aliens that would want to visit us and go back home probably have to come from rather close by, maybe a dozen or tens, or even 100 light years is pretty far, because they would have to take them 200 years to get to us and back. So what would be their incentive? Because by the time they got back home, probably everybody they knew would be dead, right? So you're talking about anyone who's visited Earth would have to have come from very close by. And that means a relatively small number of planets.
Yeah.
And if the probability of evolution of life on intelligent life is very low per planet, it means it probably very small chance of that. But there's an even stronger argument, which is, even if life existed at some point on a planet that wasn't too far away, the chance that it, or even that it would be existing at the same time as us, that they'd be our contemporaries, seems to be almost vanishingly small. Human life has only existed for a couple 100,000 years, say. on this planet, 200 or 300,000 years. Advanced technical civilization only for 100 years.
Right.
And the age of the universe is 14 billion years. So the chance, and even if how long will an advanced civilization last? Maybe thousands of years, tens of thousands.
Yeah.
So the chance that, if there was life on some planet that wasn't ridiculously far away, it either probably has died out or just ended hundreds of millions of years ago, or has not yet appeared on that planet, will not appear for hundreds of millions of years. The chance that they would be exactly living at our time is very, very small, it would seem. And so for these and other reasons, I think most scientists would say the chance that we have been visited by such life is absurdly small.
Yeah.
So don't worry about it.
Yeah. Well, speaking of probabilities, interesting, these betting markets that you can bet on anything. I was just looking at those the other day, and what's the odds that the U.S. is going to announce that aliens have visited, and just like the Defense Department? So the odds are 1 in like 100 right now. So,
really? It's only 1 in 100.
It's the betting markets, but that's because how many people actually think that that's true. We're not going to put money on it. So,
but those 1/100th of people who are betting that way are the people who know.
Nobody knows, right? But they just think they know, right? They've been contacted.
Were you there to bet, Dan, or were you trying to put something down on the Detroit Lions?
That's even more unlikely, right? That you'd win money on that bet than the alien. I think it's more likely that aliens are going to visit the Earth than the Lions will win a Super Bowl.
Yes, we've talked about this in other fora.
Yeah, well, if there are aliens and they do visit Earth, would they be allowed to play in the NFL and things like that? Or?
As long as they're good, I think some teams would be happy to have them.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. They might identify as human beings, so then you'd have to have. Anyway.
Exactly. Well, whether they visit Earth or not, the fact that there is certainly the possibility that life forms on other planets exist, and the possibility that there's rational life on the other planets. So we talked about scientifically the reasons to suspect this might be the case or not be the case. But what is the theological reasons? Are the theological reasons that we would think, no, they can't be rational life on other planets, or are there theological reasons to think, yeah, that's quite possible?
Well, as you can imagine, theologians are pretty heavily divided in that regard, right? A lot of times it comes down to the question of biblical interpretation, right? So we hear about human beings in God's image and likeness, but we hear of no others, right?
Yes.
But silence is not necessarily, or silence is never, or perhaps not always, an assertion, right? We recognize that a number of ways in which the scripture is written precisely to reveal to us God's relationship with our species, with the human race, right? And the works of salvation that he's done on this planet. So you could say, well, we don't hear about these other things, but that doesn't mean there isn't life out there, because if, in fact, there would be, it really wasn't necessarily, it wasn't that God was revealing himself to us, not the existence of other creatures in other places, right?
Yeah.
So that might be one reason, right? The silence of scripture on this matter. But it hasn't kept theologians from speculating about the possibility, nor has it always been kind of, or in nearly every case, the attitude of theologians that this is simply contrary to what God has revealed, right?
Yeah, and the church, though, has said nothing about this in terms of its official capacity. There's no official church teaching you can look at. So
Right.
how would you go about, contemplating this question with not having, hey, I'm going to appeal to this magisterial document that's going to tell me, this about extraterrestrial life, right?
Well, I think that one way that you can do this, and one way that I've tried to do this, and I must say that this is extremely speculative, and I hold all of these hypotheses or theological ideas kind of lightly, right? is the idea of St. John Henry Newman, that what we find in the church's teaching, right, is not simply doctrines, but a series of key vital principles that animate those doctrines, right? So we talk about the incarnation, and we talk about the Eucharist, we talk about the sacraments, right? Newman identifies a principle called sacramentality, right? That God can and does um, speak to us and reach us through material medium, right? And in fact, he kind of holds that principle of sacramentality uh, when he refers to the incarnation. So you have this particular example. You also have, or what we see throughout history, is the principle of particularity, right? Which means that God works through one or through a small group to save, to reach beyond that group, to unite the whole human race, right? So we talk about the Jews as the chosen people, right? There weren't chosen people on every continent and in every age. There was this
Yeah.
people beginning, right, with Abraham and forward. It's not that God wasn't operative in the world or active in the world, but this people was chosen, right? And then ultimately, even from that people, you have smaller groups like the remnant that returns from the exile, and ultimately one woman, the Blessed Virgin Mary, right, who's yes to God, then becomes the entrance of God into human history as a fully human being, and the unification of all of humanity in relation, you know what I mean, to one another through
Right.
and in him. Um, and then we could also talk about the principle of solidarity, that when the Son came, he took on a true human nature and he united himself to our race. And above all, he gave himself on the cross for the sake of our salvation, due to our fallenness, due to our sin and our sinfulness and our need for redemption and forgiveness. So when we put those principles at play, right, which we see animating doctrine in, numerous ways, we might be able to speculate
Yeah.
about if, and I put the big if there, if there is life created in the image and likeness of God on other planets, right? God's involvement or engagement with that species or that group, right?
Yeah.
I kind of jokingly call them off-planet rational animals, right?
Nice.
Just because it's easier to say than ETRS, extraterrestrial rational species.
Okay. Yeah.
Um,
Well, let's
then,
take a couple of those principles that you
yeah,
just said, and let's think about them, because some
sure,
like this universality versus particularity, right? And this like this question that you often get: Hey, look, if there's rational life on other planets, species made in the image and likeness of God, um, universality, like Christ saves all. There's a universal principle
sure,
there, but there's also the particular. If Christ became a man, became
right.
human to save the human race. So how do you square those two? Because they almost seem to be, as you try to speculate about how are they saved if they need to be saved, the principles of universality and particularity seem to not mesh well.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So think about, and this is why I hold these ideas kind of lightly, right? Because think about,
I hold all my ideas lightly. So
yeah, all your ideas lightly, yeah. And this is perhaps one of the best place to be doing that. Yeah.
yeah.
So think about the principle of particularity on a cosmic scale, right? Could it be that God chose the human race, right, and his relationship with them to be the way in which all rational creatures are saved, however that might happen, right? Um, I think that the principle of particularity, in which God chooses small for the sake of all, as I like to put it, right, would certainly would certainly jive with that way of thinking about it, right? But then you bring in the principle of solidarity, right? If you have rational creatures on other planets, what better way would God mediate his relationship with them than by mediating it himself as he did with us, right? By becoming a
Mhm.
fully well, in our case, a fully human being, right? Um,
So you're talking
so
about multiple, so God becoming incarnate on other worlds, in taking
right,
the form of those creatures.
right.
Right.
When you think about the principle of sacramentality, right? That sacramentality always involves, in our case, and I think this would have to be the case anywhere else, always involves historical contingency, right? And ways in which God takes up that which in his providence has emerged in for instance, Jewish culture, right?
Right.
Takes that up and actually makes that the way in which he reveals himself and does so through uh, prophets, sages, psalmists, individuals who he brings into his service precisely to lead up to an incarnation, right? Why wouldn't we not expect a similar way of God dealing with creatures? In other words, or creatures on other planets, extraterrestrial, rational creatures created in his image.
Yeah.
Well,
And, and,
there I would imagine that there's some division among theologians. Some probably would say that if there are rational
and
ETs, that God would become incarnate for them,
Yes.
and others who would say, "No, there's only one incarnation, it's on earth, and
Right.
that serves to save everybody." So
Yes.
is there that division? I mean,
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah.
is there like one view is much more widespread among theologians than the
It
other?
it would
Or?
be hard to say because there isn't a lot of writing about this particular matter.
Mhm.
So some do, some don't. You know what I
Right.
mean? In terms of history, it would be hard to say. Um, but what we can say is, I think, is that um, God is faithful, and as part of his fidelity, right? We believe that he has chosen the most fitting means to reveal himself and also to save us, right?
Yeah. Right.
So I think there's a good reason for us to try to think about God's interaction, or sorry, rather God's, I don't know if interaction is the right way, but God's self-disclosure is a better way to put it, with other species on other planets along the same patterns that we see here.
Mhm.
yeah.
Right.
What are we going to look at maybe some of the objections to either of those two positions that Steve laid out? The idea that Christ incarnated multiple times versus Christ incarnated once and saved all extraterrestrial species. So this idea that Christ incarnated multiple times, a lot of people that seems to
Yeah,
conflict with this idea that Christ is both God and human. Now it could be both human and then some other species as well. The
yeah,
right that seems to contradict sort of the way the Catholic Church thinks about Christ, right?
right. Okay, well, yeah, sure. It
So,
it might
I know
seem on the
people would
face,
argue that. Yeah.
yeah, some people would argue that, but the angelic doctor, St. Thomas Aquinas himself, thought that um, Christ could, right? He didn't, but he could, right? Or the Son of God could have become incarnate more than once, even on our own planet. Um, why? Well, because God can't be circumscribed by any creature. That means that in uniting himself to this nature, right? This individual human nature does not mean that he can also not do it otherwise. Now, he didn't think that God did that, right? And of course, he's not saying that God did that. But what he is saying is that when God takes up a human nature, as we know from the Council of Chalcedon, he does so in the incarnation in such a way that God is not circumscribed, nor are the two natures blended with one another,
Yeah.
right? So he does so without confusion or change, right? So we don't have a situation where the one nature is kind of absorbed by the other, that is, the human by the divine, um, and without division or separation. That is, they are united in the one second person of the Trinity, right? who brings these two natures together, but they remain complete so that we can say there's a union, a hypostatic union, and is one person or hypostasis, right? Rather than a blending of the natures.
Yeah.
Right.
So you could have multiple hypostatic unions there of the second person of the
Exactly.
Trinity, right? Yeah.
Right. You could have multiple hypostatic unions. Now, how that problematizes our picture of the afterlife is a good question. We don't think about, you know what I mean? What would our relationship be with the incarnate Son of God, who is, incarnate for another rational species? Once we're beyond this life and in eternal life fully, right?
Yeah.
Would that also then be a situation where there would be confusion even there, right? That's something that's brought up to me pretty often when I talk about this kind of
Yeah.
thing. It's hard to think about what that would be like. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
You wonder if
I have the sense that some people might be bothered by multiple incarnations because they think about the incarnation on Earth. They say, well, we have this pot, and you put some God in it, and then you added some human,
Yeah.
and stirred them up, and that's so you have the God Man, Jesus Christ, who. And then
Yeah.
they think, but now if you start putting in some Klingons and some Vulcans and some Romulans, you're going to get
What a mess.
a god awful mess, because then won't the human Christ and that will also be a Klingon, and then you have like this sort of blended creature that's like part human, part Klingon. But there is
Right.
no blending, as you said. I
Right.
think
There is no
that's
blending.
what's in the mind of some people. I think there is a blending, and so you better not try to blend more than two.
Right. So Jesus Christ is not partly God and partly man, right? It's not
Right.
like he's on a part of a human nature, right? Um, he took on a whole human nature. He's
Right.
fully human, right? While also fully divine. And that full humanity would not be disturbed as such if there was another incarnation on another planet someplace else,
Right.
right?
Yeah. One of
As
the things that,
strange as it is to think that way,
yeah.
you know what I mean? Or to kind of try to conceive of it. Yeah.
Yeah. One of the questions I posed to both of you, I mean, I thought about this, the
Yeah.
role of Mary, right? So you talk about the incarnation, Mary being, the queen of heaven and earth, because, so if Christ is incarnate on a different planet, is there another queen, right? Is there another a Mary figure, right? And so now,
Yeah.
is there multiple queens in heaven? Does that cause problems, or how might we think of that, right? Because I think a lot of people don't think of that when they think of Christ incarnating on other planets, right?
Right. Yeah. I would assume that there would be queenship of a sort, right? For the Mother of God in his extraterrestrial form. But I wouldn't see that as something that is competitive, right? Like somehow dividing or compromising the queenship of Mary, the mother of Jesus, right? Why? Well, because queenship, this reality, right, is not a matter of subjugation or domination. It follows the Trinitarian principle, right? The Son is eternally begotten of the Father, but he's also co-equal with the Father. The Holy Spirit proceeds from the Father and the Son, but he is co-equal with the Son, right? Would such a relationship be something that resonates with that, right? Between, right, or as we think about the queenship of Mary and the queenship of
Okay.
whoever
Yeah.
else.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I have a question about that. So,
Yeah.
actually, this queenship of Mary is. I had a friend who died some years ago, a Jesuit, a fairly well-known Jesuit priest, and
Uh-huh.
I was discussing this all with him, and I
Yeah.
was talking about could there be multiple incarnations of the Son of God, and he was really upset by that idea. But one of his main arguments is that Mary is the Queen of Heaven, and therefore they can. And so I have a crazy idea I want to bounce off you, Chris.
Okay. Yeah.
So, in some sense, could there be multiple heavens? That is, one for humans, one for Klingons. Let's, for want of a better term, because what is heaven. It's all the redeemed. It's the reunification, so to speak, of all humanity with God and with each other. Right? It's a
Right.
kind of it's the mystical body of Christ and all that. But if Christ had a Klingon body, there would be all the Klingons
Right.
united
Right.
with each other and with God in perhaps a different mystical body, a different
Yeah.
body, a body of Christ, but it would be the Klingon Christ. And so maybe there's Mary is the queen of sort of human heaven,
Yeah.
and there could be a different queen of the different heaven. Is that way out of bounds? I mean, thinking there could be a
Oh my
different heavens,
goodness.
as it were.
It's worth entertaining whether or not we would actually say this is, definitely the case. I think
Right,
I would never want to venture that far.
right, right.
Right. But, but, um, could there be that situation? At least, um, as far as I'm thinking about it, I don't think that that would be the case. What is heaven, right?
Right,
Heaven is the divinization of God's creatures where they become to partake in the divine nature, right?
right. Mhm.
And it is a communion amongst all of the redeemed. It is a feast, right?
Right.
Uh, it is, or it comes after ultimately the general judgment and the resurrection of the body,
Mhm.
which is the ultimate step in establishing this new heaven, right?
Right.
Um, I could certainly see that such a process might occur in relation to another species in such a way that we, right, and they remain distinct in this glorified state, in the beatific
Yeah,
nature.
that's what I was thinking, distinct because, in a sense,
Yeah,
we have no history with them in this life.
exactly.
Like, it's they have I'm assuming there's no interaction and they don't visit each other.
Right.
They have a completely different history that's d separate from ours, so maybe there's some distinction in heaven between them and us that
Yeah. That's certainly, I think, it's worth
yeah,
considering, right?
Yeah.
It's worth thinking about. I think that, one thing that Joseph Ratzinger once said in his book Eschatology, Steve, a book you and I have talked about many times, is that the incarnation is God's yes to time and history, right? And he talks about how um, that history, or in the general judgment, in the final things, in the resurrection of the body, only then, when human history is complete, do we begin to see the whole and our place in it, right?
mhm, mhm,
And that will be the ultimate establishment of heaven. It won't just be the intermediate state where we go to heaven, where our souls go to heaven, right? But we are not yet fully human again, right? In the sense
mhm,
that we have bodies and souls
right.
as one unity. Um, so, with that in mind, it seems to me that this idea of history might have a more decisive role that would at least make it more reasonable to think that there would be one heaven for us and one heaven for another. Yeah. What do you think, Dan?
I yeah, I think that that makes sense there. I don't really have enough theological knowledge to speculate on that, but it does seem to make sense that that not having any connection with these Klingons or these whatever these
Right.
things are, that
Mhm.
I think with the human race we have a connection with them, even though people we don't know, we have this innate connection with them and experiential
Yes.
connection of what it's like to live and to be and to breathe and to struggle and so forth. There's some
Yeah.
immediate unification with them in heaven would seem appropriate, but but again, I defer to the theologian in the room here. Uh,
Oh, yeah.
In this
but I
virtual
do want
room.
to talk about
Yeah. Yeah.
the other option that Christ died on earth, and that is enough for the salvation of all rational creatures throughout the universe. Because there's something odd there, and I just want to know from your perspective, Chris or Steve, like how theologians might think of that. Because there is a sense like, right, so Christ died, at a particular time. So there was people on earth that never got to know Christ. And so his message never reached them, right?
Right.
But there is a sense in salvation history that his message of particularly through the church, goes to the ends of the earth, that all humans are meant to know this and will
Right.
know this, right? And we spread the gospel, right? And
Yes.
as Steve was saying earlier, this idea that no, these aliens aren't going to visit us. The odds of aliens, civilizations, us and another alien civilization ever coming into contact are extremely low. So this idea that Christ died for these other alien civilizations when there's no way that the gospel message could get to them seems to me not the
Right.
most efficient way of doing of proclaiming salvation to
Yeah.
so how
Could you
would
have could you have an incarnation on that planet, and through that incarnation, the announcement of this salvation won on the
oh okay,
cross?
yeah.
I mean, you could have that there's an option.
There's an
Right.
option, yeah. So Christ's his death
Yeah.
and resurrection is a unique event here on earth, and it's told via his incarnation on these. I never, yeah, that's a good way of thinking of
I've
how the
always
message
had,
spreads. It's yeah, it
I've had
takes
this
care of the
thought
time
that
travel problem.
if we ever communicated with aliens, which is easier presumably than visiting or being visited by, but suppose we were able to talk to them
Yeah.
by radio signals or whatever. I would say they might be monotheists who had been visited by, who had prophets, like on Earth had prophets and that kind of thing, in which case they would be Jewish aliens.
Right. All right. Okay.
But if they had the incarnation on their planet, and also if they knew about the Trinity, they would be Christian aliens.
Right.
But they
Yeah.
could be, in a sense, like in the position of the Jews, but where they were told there was a redeemer. It wasn't going to be on their planet, but there is a redeemer, and they're told about it, as you said. And they could be that
Right.
could be one way that God might do things.
Absolutely. I mean, I what we do know, I think, without any doubt, is that the merits of Christ's sacrifice are infinite. They're superabundant, right? They because it is the sacrifice of a divine person in his human nature. Um, it's not something that has limits, right? Um, but and there's another way of turning it, and without denying that, right? And that is that God's desire to unite himself as fully as possible to um, to to his creatures, right? His rational creatures, in such a way that they can know him um, with the kind of immediacy that's allowed us because we uh, received him as one of our own, right? Or you know what I mean? And he was here present for us in our nature, living a fully human life without any sin whatsoever, right? Um, that principle, which I call the principle of solidarity when I talk about it, right? This idea that the lover longs to not only do what is good, but also to unite themselves to the beloved, right?
Right.
Is there a way in which that might tilt the scale for some in the other direction? Yeah.
Right. I mean, for the principle of solidarity, there's Hebrews. The letter to the Hebrews is it the letter to the Hebrews? That makes a big point that our Redeemer Christ was a man like us
Yes.
in all things but sin, and that.
Right.
So I mean that is kind of important.
Yeah. Right.
And
Exactly.
that's what is calling the principle of solidarity.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. So, and again, when you're looking at these things, it's almost as if this vast series. It seems like a simple thing, yes or no, but this vast series of possibilities opens up, and where to put the emphasis is difficult, right? Um, of course, Christ can save all rational creatures through his one death on the cross, right? But like you say, then you've got this other thing, right? Doesn't he want to offer them a perfect example of what it means to live a fully human life, right?
Right.
Would they also benefit from a new Adam,
Right.
right? A new beginning to their race, like we have with ours, where we finally discover what it means to be human, which sin had obscured and does obscure. Yeah.
Yeah. So actually, one thing that we all would agree, I think all the theologians, all the Catholics would agree, however God does it, he certainly wants all, not just all men to be saved, but all his rational creatures to be saved.
Right.
I mean, there are probably there are extreme Calvinists who say that God actually, from all eternity, did not will all people to be saved. He only willed a certain group, and the others he willed to be damned. But it's Catholic teaching, right? That God
Yes.
God desires, wills the salvation. It doesn't
Yeah.
necessarily, not that everyone is saved, but that he wants all men to be saved.
Right.
I guess that would apply for Catholics.
Right. First Timothy, God
For
desires
all
all men to be
creatures.
saved and
Yeah.
come to the knowledge of the truth. Yeah.
So however he does it, we don't have to worry that these aliens are left out in the cold, and God is going to do something to save them, presumably.
Right. Right. And just like God's yes to history included him coming in the fullness of time, which meant that there were generations upon generations of human beings who never got to meet him, who never got to hear the gospel proclaimed, right? Um, just as that's that situation, perhaps we could go in the other direction and say, and that would be the situation for them, that God would make it known to them their salvation, but you know what I mean?
Mhm.
Um, in a sense, they would not have the benefit or the merit, the privilege, the incredible singular privilege of having him unite himself to their specific biological nature. Yeah.
Yeah, there is a sense that you mentioned near the beginning about the scriptural passages that make man, it's a special creation, right? And
Right.
so there's a lot of people that really bristle at the idea that there's another
Yeah.
special creation out there, right?
Yeah.
And I think you should have mentioned that the Bible's written for us; it's for our salvation. It's not obviously a text written for other salvation. But is there something sort of inherent in that man is no longer the crown of creation? Like, oh, it's diminishing man's importance,
Yeah.
and we got to hold
I
on to it.
think,
But it does,
Yeah.
yeah. I mean, maybe both of you guys can speak to that.
no, I'm
What,
just
what do
saying,
you think?
I get that sense too, that when Catholics come across Catholics who are extremely hostile to the idea that there are rational species elsewhere in the universe, because somehow that denigrates, that demotes us, then we're not important or we're not central anymore. And I think that really is, a lot of people feel that way. So
Yeah.
what would you say, Chris, to that?
Okay. This might be a little simplistic, but off the top of my head, I would simply say um, the proliferation of the human race doesn't make any individual human being less special.
That's a great point. Yeah.
In other words, the more human beings that there are, we don't look and say somehow the crown of creation has been divided up, right? So to this particular point, well, because why?
Right.
Well, this is not a kind of crowning of creation that is quantitative.
Right.
It's a crowning of creation that's qualitative, that has to do with human beings as creatures who can know the truth, who can love, who can respond to, who can conceive of God and speak to God, and above all, hear God in response.
Right.
And when you think about it that way, I think that it's not as hard to conceive that there could be others who do that, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's not like with a human that all of us here have multiple children. I
Yeah,
think among us we have what? We probably have, let's see, 14 or something, 15.
something about that. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
But
I
I
think
think
maybe a little more. So I've got 4, Dan. You've got
6,
6
6.
and I got 5, so it's
Oh, there you go, 15.
15.
Right.
We're up to 15
So
now. Yeah.
Catholics understand that if you love your children, that's not a reason to have fewer of them.
Right.
Yeah, we don't
Yeah.
divide our love
That's right. I
evenly,
mean,
and it gets
I
diminished
can
as you
see
get
that
7 and 8. Yeah.
if I had 50 children, I might not be able to spend as much time with each of them, or 100. But
Right.
God is like, it's not like there's only so much of God, and therefore if he's concerned with humans, other races of creatures would get less of him. I mean, that wouldn't make sense.
No. Yeah, yeah, right. Um, and when do we so in scripture, right, we have to ask, we're the crown of creation, um, other than or different, you know what I mean? In other words, we're the crown of creation. in relation to, I should say, what? Well, the other creatures, right, that were known to the human author of sacred scripture, right? There's the key, it seems, right? It's our nature that makes us the image and likeness of God. And so consequently, if there were any other nature that would be the image and likeness of God, it wouldn't necessarily be that scripture was rejecting that idea, right? Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. There's another sort of theological impetus that drives people's views on this, and this is the idea of this, the principle of plenitude, the idea that if God creates and He is going to create in abundance, right? And that's
Right.
sort of like with evolution versus a static universe, evolutionary universe. There can be more things that are created, more species, and so forth. That shows God's greater abundance. A similar thing here, like God's plenitude, that He would not just limit Himself to creating one rational creature, but have created multiple ones throughout the universe. What do you think of that argument? That's sort of a theological argument for more
Yeah.
rational life throughout the universe.
That tracks well with what Cardinal Nicholas of Cusa said. He believed that due to God's creativity, there would be species on other planets. He thinks on the sun, he thinks on the moon, right? Yeah, so that's certainly a possibility. This superabundance, right, of God's wisdom and creativity, even as rational creatures, even as created in the image of God,
Right.
we do not exhaust the ways in which God's goodness can be participated. The other creatures, right, the universe itself, we could go on and on and on, all have their own way of participating in God's goodness, right? So, with that in mind, where would we put an end to that, right? Would we have to say, no, only Homo sapiens, only this species can actually participate in God's goodness in this rational kind of highest possible way? And even this is not the highest, because the angels, right, are an even higher way of, at least in terms of their nature, an even higher way of participating in that, in God's goodness and expressing God's goodness.
You mentioned, Chris, you mentioned this book by Paul Thigpen.
Yeah.
And I found it a fascinating book because he goes through all the history of speculation among Christians
Right.
and I was surprised. I didn't realize that Christians were speculating about extraterrestrial rational creatures for hundreds of years. And I was also really surprised that most of those who speculated, this included clergymen and theologians and poets and so on, had a positive view and felt that this principle of plenitude, that God would create large numbers of
Right.
So I was kind of surprised to hear that, and I think a lot of people would be, because I think some people are kind of worried about this because they imagine that this is something really new, that for 2,000 years all Christians believed like there was just us, and now science is upsetting the apple cart. But even before science, there were people speculating, as you said, Nicholas of Cusa in the 15th century was speculating like this and said God would do this if He could. So I learned from that book that really sound
Yeah,
fascinating.
he also has an article on our website too. There's an article up
Yeah.
on the side of
Paul
Catholic Science
that's
website
right.
that summarizes his book. So if you're
Right.
interested in that, you can see that article, that go to the book as well. So
Yeah. But so obviously there's a lot for theologians to speculate about. It'll probably, as Steve showed us, only be speculation.
Right.
But one thing that I think is significant about such speculation is that it can help people understand their faith and what God has revealed better, right? I mean, just think about the things that we've talked about. We've talked about the authority of Scripture. We've talked about the hypostatic union. We've talked about these great principles: sacramentality, particularity, solidarity. That are those things. As long as we don't try to come down hard on one thing or other, or don't recognize their validity across the board, I think actually can be helpful speculation. This
Right.
kind of theological speculation, even if we never find out if we were speculating about something that does exist or doesn't exist.
Right.
Yeah. Oh,
I mean, some people don't like even speculation. I was on a Catholic radio call-in show.
Uh-huh.
Someone called in and said, "Why are you talking?" It was not my idea. I was invited on the show to talk about
Right.
why are you
Yeah.
talking about aliens? There's no evidence that aliens exist, and why are you talking about this? And I think, if for no other reason, is that polls have shown that a very large portion of the human race actually believes that there are aliens, whether they're
Yes.
justified. And if a lot of people believe that they exist, then it's an important thing to show that the existence of aliens is not contrary to the Catholic faith in any way, and it
Right.
actually could be Catholic theological ideas could be it could easily incorporate this without any damage to Catholic belief.
yeah.
So,
And it seems like they've been trying to do this for over a millennia now in the Catholic Church.
Yeah.
Like you see this speculation. So it's not some rearguard action to speculate on these things. When the church forever said, no, just man, there's no obvious other rational life elsewhere on earth. They've been speculating on this stuff for a long, long time. So
Yeah.
one last speculation before we close here. It's been a great conversation, but I'm going to ask both of you, if Steve, somebody put a gun to your head, said, do rational aliens exist? What would you say? Would you say yes or no? If you had to make a bet on one side or the other, right? And not using probability. Would you say, yes, I think that I would go with put my money on they do exist or they don't?
I say I don't think we're in a position to say it's probable or that it's improbable.
But where would you put your money?
I would flip a coin. On my own view, however, I do think this is, given that you're multiplying a very big number and a small number,
Yeah.
I think you're either going to find either it's only us, or it's vast numbers of planets have rational intelligent life. I think it's one of the. I don't think in the entire cosmos it's like 3 planets have.
Okay.
It's either only us or it's a lot. Can I make one point?
That brings me to the question I want to ask Dan. So yeah, go ahead, Steve. But I want to
one thing I want to make clear: people might be thinking, and might be some people listening to this might think it's not just a question of whether. It's not that we're saying that creatures like us are purely the result of evolution. Like, even if evolution on another planet somewhere produced highly sophisticated life forms, which were intelligent in the way like dolphins are intelligent or dogs are intelligent, to have a rational species made in the image of God with immortal souls, God has to, at some point on those planets, intervene to raise
That's a good point. Yeah.
species to the level of rationality, so they're truly in the image of God. So a mere evolutionary calculation isn't going to be enough.
exactly
But presumably, if things got to a certain level,
right.
where God, where the preconditions existed, God might decide to raise some of them to the level of rationality, or he might leave them all at the level of chimps or hominins or something like that, or something at the level of gorillas. That's up to God, right? But we're not saying that evolution is a complete explanation. If there are rational ETs, God created them and created their souls.
Right. Yeah, absolutely.
I just don't want people to get the wrong idea out there.
Right. And Dan, so I have a question for you. Unless we're going over, I don't know if we are or not.
No, that's fine.
So do you think some form of life, based on what you know in biology, based on ideas like convergence, based on things I've heard you present on, like the folding, the protein folding, only folding in certain ways, and these ways are what's necessary for life. Based on those kind of things, do you think that some form of life out there is probable?
Yeah, I mean, I would think I would be on the Simon Conway Morris side of this view that we're not really sure enough how you get to that first life. But I think once you have life established on a planet, an evolving ecosystem, then I think over time, life is equipped with enough solutions and cooperation and exchange of information that you will get, and constrained to some extent that you would get. I think that's the hard step, getting that first a life form and so forth. But once you have that, there's certain pathways that are going to go, and I think it's going to be highly likely that you end up getting to more intelligent life, or a being that's capable of being rationally ensouled, as Steve has pointed
Can
out,
I
right?
jump in
I
with
just
it?
think,
Yeah.
I just think that the probability of that is going to be much higher. And it's not going to be like 100% probably, but I'd say, maybe 1 in 100, 1 in 1,000, 1 in manageable probabilities. But getting that first life form, that's where the rubber meets the road. But I do think
Yeah.
that after that, I think it's totally manageable, given the propensity of life and the properties that living organisms have. And
Right.
and as you talked about, the convergence that you see on our planet.
And
Right.
a scientific comment on that. But it could be, I think most people, scientists would say that if we do discover life on exoplanets, planets of other stars, it's probably going to be microbial, because it's much more likely to find a planet in which the life has never got beyond the one cell stage. Because on Earth, right, Dan, you didn't get multicellular complex life until billions of years had gone by, right?
That's
And
right.
so,
Yeah. No,
Yeah.
but I do think that, like, it will, as long as you don't sterilize the entire planet. I think as
correct.
long as you have enough time that
Ah,
you will eventually get there. But yeah, if we do discover, if you just drop yourself down on a bunch of exoplanets, you're most likely going to drop yourself down in a period where there is not complex life yet,
right.
right? And so, but I do think that, over time, a lot of these, and they're not 100%, but maybe 1 in 1,000, 1 in 10,000,
Right.
1 in 100, a high probability, when we're talking about these astronomical probabilities,
There
right?
is
That you
there
would get
is
to
a there is a possibility that some people have talked about, which is it could be that if there are several hard steps, even after you make life, there might be other hard steps, that the time you would expect to take to get over, you said if there's enough time, it could be that the time you need to get over those hard steps could be trillions of years, and it won't, where stars only last for billions. And so it could be that we're lucky on this planet,
Yeah.
that life got
Yeah.
started on many planets, but there wasn't time to go all the way to very complex life, and that we're one of those very rare planets where it happened quickly.
Right.
It happened before the sun blew up, because
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
there is this time scale. People argue about that.
Yeah.
Whether
Yeah.
it is kind of a strange coincidence that the sun lifetime is about 10 billion years, and the time it took for complex life to evolve on Earth was several billion years. So very close, these numbers.
Hmm.
And it's lucky, because if
Yeah.
it didn't have to be that way, it could be the time it takes life to reach a high level could be a trillion years for all we know.
Right.
It doesn't have to be a billion, but if it doesn't happen within several billion years, you're out of luck, because the sun blows up, right?
Yeah, right. Yeah, one of those steps of getting, like, complex, larger organisms, you're like, well, you need to get a certain level of oxygenation in the atmosphere,
Yeah.
and so that doesn't happen regularly, and that might be a hard step to get to that, which then allows more complex life. And yeah, and so many of these things we don't have, probabilities for. But I mean, there's people
Right.
that argue both, that's just sort of an artifact, or that these hard steps, we're just lucky that we got through them quicker, and most planets would never get through them quick enough to get to
Right.
intelligent life. But I don't think we can adjudicate uh,
Yeah.
that controversy. Yeah,
Right. So
we
it's
don't have
right
enough
there.
knowledge.
That's really the sticking point on the whole question, right? Would be the origin of life issue from, you know what I mean? A chemical, right?
Right,
Origin.
right, and I think that's where we have the least knowledge. I'm not saying it can't
Yeah.
be done. I'm just saying we have the least ability to come up with probabilities there,
Right.
or come up with reasonable ideas. A lot of these hard steps, you could say, "Oh, that actually happened multiple times on Earth," or so maybe it's more likely. So you at least have some evidence that they're going one way or the other, right? But yeah. So it's a lot of these things, are very, very obviously speculative, but
Mhm.
interesting questions to comprehend. And if I were to put my money down, I would put down my money down that there is rational life somewhere else in the
Would you?
universe. The universe is a big place, particularly if it goes on forever. As Steve pointed out, that's a distinct possibility. I just think that resonates more with my understanding of God and
Yeah.
his grandeur and so forth. And I don't, but I don't have like a scientific evidence to back that up. It's just if I have $100 in my pocket, I'm itching to put it on one or the other.
Well,
That's where I put my.
if you force me to bet, I would bet that there's vast numbers of planets with intelligent life, intelligent in the sense of rational, but we might be the only one in our galaxy.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay.
I guess
go with
that's
that.
where I'd put, if I really had to bet, I guess I'd bet there.
All right.
There
Chris,
you go.
you can end up. Where's your bet going? And then we can wrap up here.
Oh, my bet.
Yeah.
Oh goodness. Microbial life, certainly from what I've heard, and
Okay.
this is, I'm not a scientist, but this is what I've heard
But you are a betting man, so
I am a betting man occasionally, very occasionally.
no,
I'm sorry. Let me go back. So microbial life, simple life.
yeah.
I would certainly bet on that. Eukaryotic life, like animal life. Not sure. You know what I mean? If I would go that far, because at a certain point, my science understanding is kind of limited. Yeah.
Yeah.
But I would think that considering all of the ways in which microbial life has happened on our planet and the extreme environments in which it's happened and all of those kinds of things, sure, I'm down with that.
Yeah.
It says a rational life, man. I'm going to keep my money in my pocket. It's Christmas time, and I got to buy
buy
gifts.
gifts for all those kids. So
That's right. That's right.
Oh gosh. Well, Chris, thanks for joining us. It's been a great conversation. It's as you pointed out, we're speculating on this topic, but it does bring up a lot of sort of catechesis. This is opportunities
rich
for understanding
theological
our
ideas.
faith a little bit better and a little bit deeper, and knowing where we have we're putting sort of absolutes where there shouldn't be absolutes, or where we're misunderstanding something. So it's been very, very informative. So thanks, Chris. Appreciate you being on.
Oh,
And
thank you.
Steve, for all your comments as well.
This was a lot of fun. We should do this again.
I would be happy to.
It's such a fun topic.
Yes, it is.
It is. It's inexhaustible to talk about itself. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Catholic Scientist Podcast, sponsored by the Society of Catholic Scientists. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider subscribing. And you can also show your support by donating to the Society to help us produce content like you just heard. You can donate by going to our website at catholicscientist.org and clicking on the donate button. You can also find other useful resources, articles, and videos on our website.